The idyllic suburb of Everwood was the perfect place to live, thanks to its charismatic leader, Arthur Finch. But when the Miller family, Mark, Sarah, and Lily, vanished without a trace, the community's perfect facade began to crack. Years later, tenacious blogger Chloe uncovered a terrifying symbol connecting Finch to a radical doomsday cult, leading Detective Evans to a horrifying discovery: a network of tunnels and a secret buried deep beneath the town, revealing that the most dangerous monsters were the ones. Everwood was the kind of place featured in glossy magazines, a testament to suburban perfection. The streets were wide and clean, lined with identical, well-kept houses, each with a lush green lawn and a cheerful mailbox. Children played safely on the sidewalks, and neighbors knew each other by name, often gathering for impromptu barbecues on weekends. The heart and soul of this harmony was the Everwood Community Association, and its undisputed leader was Arthur Finch. Arthur was a man in his late 50s, with a warm smile and a genuine talent for making people feel seen and heard. He was the first to welcome new families with a homemade pie, the one who organized the annual street fair that drew crowds from neighboring towns, and the person you could call at any hour if your basement flooded or your car wouldn't start. Under his guidance, the Neighborhood Watch program wasn't just effective, it was a social event, with monthly meetings that felt more like block parties. He fostered an environment of unwavering trust and mutual dependence. The association's board was composed of a tight-knit group of long-term residents, a retired schoolteacher, a friendly dentist, a stay-at-home mom who was a whiz at fundraising. They were all pillars of the community, respected and admired. They shared a particular dedication to Arthur's vision, often being the first to volunteer for cleanup days or to donate to a family in crisis. Their homes were slightly more prominent, their gardens slightly more impeccable, setting the standard for everyone else. To the other residents, this inner circle represented the ideal of what a neighbor should be: reliable, kind, and deeply invested in the collective good. This perceived perfection was the community's greatest source of pride, and though no one knew it yet, its most dangerous vulnerability. The absolute trust placed in Arthur Finch and his board meant that no one ever thought to question their decisions, their unusual level of control over neighborhood affairs, or what they might be doing behind their always open doors. The stage was perfectly set, the players were in place, and the illusion of paradise was complete. The illusion of Everwood's perfect world shattered on a Tuesday morning. It was the mail carrier who first noticed something was wrong. The Millers' mail from the past 3 days was still stuffed in their box, and their newspapers were piling up on the driveway. Concerned, he mentioned it to a neighbor, who then called Sarah Miller's phone. It went straight to voicemail. Mark Miller hadn't shown up for his job as an accountant, which was unheard of. By that evening, a growing sense of dread led the neighbor to call the police. Officers found the Miller home unlocked. Inside, the scene was deeply unsettling in its normalcy. The house was spotless, as always. In the kitchen, 3 bowls of cereal sat on the table, the milk now sour and curdled. A single coffee cup half full was next to the sink. Upstairs, the beds were neatly made. Closets were full of clothes. Suitcases were still in the attic. The family's car was in the garage. Their passports, wallets, and all 3 of their phones were lined up on a dresser, as if placed there deliberately. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, nothing out of place. It was as if Mark, Sarah, and their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had been midway through breakfast and simply ceased to exist. The police launched a massive investigation. They interviewed every neighbor, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. The Everwood Community Association, led by a visibly distraught Arthur Finch, swung into action. He gave emotional television interviews, pleading for the family's safe return. He organized around-the-clock search parties that combed through local parks and wooded areas. The neighborhood board members were a constant, comforting presence, delivering casseroles to the investigators and assuring frightened residents that this was a terrible anomaly, a random tragedy that had struck their peaceful community. The official investigation eventually stalled. Without evidence of a crime, the case was reluctantly moved to the cold case files, a painful, unresolved mystery. The neighborhood, under Arthur Finch's reassuring guidance, slowly tried to return to normal, though the shadow of the vanished family now lay over every perfectly manicured lawn. 5 years after the Millers vanished, the case was a forgotten file in a dusty cabinet, a local legend of a tragedy no one could explain. For Chloe, A true crime blogger with a knack for digging into cold cases, it was an irresistible puzzle. She wasn't a detective. She was just persistent and obsessively detail-oriented. She began her deep dive from her small apartment, surrounded by screens filled with images of Everwood. She scoured every local news article, every community newsletter, and every public social media post from the time of the disappearance. At first, it was the sheer normality of it all that stood out. The pictures showed an idyllic suburbia, full of smiling faces at block parties and garden awards. But as Chloe stared at the hundreds of images, her eye kept being drawn to a small recurring detail. In the background of a photo from a street fair, a symbol was carved into a wooden sign. In another, it was subtly woven into the design of a community fundraiser t-shirt. It was a simple emblem, a circle with a stylized tree inside it. She saw it again on a flyer for a neighborhood watch meeting, and then her breath caught in her throat. In a close-up photo of Arthur Finch accepting an award, he was wearing a lapel pin. It was the same symbol. Driven by a gut feeling, Chloe expanded her search beyond Everwood. She spent nights combing through digital archives of old newspapers and obscure online forums. Her breakthrough came from a scanned police report from 2 states over, dated 20 years prior. It detailed the investigation into a radical group called the Guardians of the Verdant Circle. They were led by a charismatic figure named Arthur Finnegan, who preached that modern society was a cancer and that a great cleansing was inevitable. The group had vanished overnight after authorities began investigating them for stockpiling survivalist equipment and illegal weapons. The report included a grainy photocopy of their literature, and stamped at the top was their symbol, a circle with a tree. Arthur Finnegan had simply disappeared. Chloe knew with chilling certainty that Arthur Finnegan and the beloved community leader Arthur Finch were the same man. The perfect neighborhood wasn't just a community. It was a carefully constructed hiding place for a dangerous cult. Chloe's discovery was explosive, but it was still just a theory built on a decades-old police report and a symbol. She took her findings to Detective Evans, the officer who had originally worked the Miller case. He was skeptical. Arthur Finch was a local hero, and accusing him of being a doomsday cult leader based on a lapel pin felt like a stretch. However, the connection to the vanished Arthur Finnegan was just substantial enough to warrant a fresh, discreet look. The break they needed came from an unexpected event: the death of one of the original neighborhood board members, an elderly woman named Helen. As her family cleared out her home for sale, they discovered something strange in the basement. A section of the concrete floor behind the washing machine sounded hollow. Curious, they pried up the heavy slabs, revealing not dirt, but a hidden downward-leading staircase. They called the police immediately. Detective Evans arrived with a warrant. The chamber beneath Helen's basement was small and damp, but meticulously organized. It wasn't filled with weapons or supplies. It was a library and an archive. Metal shelves were lined with leather-bound journals, detailed membership rosters, and ideological texts outlining the beliefs of the Verdant Circle. The logs were written in a cold, clinical language. They spoke of assimilation of new members into Everwood and the preservation of those who posed a risk. The Millers were listed under preservation, their fate chillingly logged with a date that matched their disappearance. The most shocking find was a large hand-drawn map of Everwood. It didn't just show the streets above. It detailed a network of narrow tunnels connecting the basements of all the original board members' homes. Arthur Finch's house was at the center. The perfect community was a literal underground network, a secret fortress built over 20 years. The police now had irrefutable proof that Everwood was a cult, and its kindly leader was the most dangerous man in town. The arrests were a quiet, coordinated operation just before dawn. Arthur Finch and his inner circle were taken from their homes without a struggle, their faces masks of cold resignation rather than surprise. The news spread through Everwood like a shockwave, leaving residents bewildered and horrified. The men and women they had trusted with their community, their safety, and their children were charged with kidnapping and being the leaders of a dangerous cult. The visible threat was neutralized, but a haunting question remained. What had happened to the people they had preserved? The investigation into the tunnel system began. While structurally sound, the tunnels were empty, revealing only a means of secret movement between houses. The cult's log spoke of preservation, not murder, but no one could find where this preservation had taken place. The breakthrough came from a city worker overseeing a project to replace a water main near the community garden, a project Arthur Finch had passionately advocated for years earlier. As an excavator dug deep into the earth, its claw struck something that wasn't rock or pipe. It was the thick, rusted roof of a massive, industrial-sized underground tank. Police and forensic teams swarmed the site, carefully cutting through the heavy metal. They expected a tomb. Instead, they found a time capsule designed for life. The tank was a sealed, self-contained environment with air filtration, chemical toilets, shelves of dehydrated food, and water purification systems. And there, huddled together and squinting in the sudden daylight after years in artificial light, were Mark, Sarah, and a now teenaged Lily Miller. They were frail and disoriented but alive. They had been fed and cared for in their prison, their captors ensuring their survival for the day they would be worthy to emerge after the predicted global collapse. The Millers' disappearance wasn't a punishment. It was a twisted act of salvation in Arthur Finch's deluded mind. The perfect community had kept its darkest secret buried not in a basement, but deep beneath the symbol of its public harmony, the community garden. The truth was more shocking than anyone could have imagined.